Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today at this alumni conversation, Navigating Difficult Times. Today we have four amazing Tisch Center alumni who are going to be able to speak with all of you and share their experiences in the hopes that it is helpful for all of you. And so without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to our two SPS Alumni Council members, Amy and Steen.
You guys. Everybody hear me here?
Sound great, Steen.
There we go. Hang on. You got me on video too? There we go. Sorry.
There you are.
Technical difficulties there. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I see a few familiar places. So thank you for joining students. Thank you for joining alumni, and obviously all our friends behind the scenes over at SPS. Oh, I even see faculty here. Hi, Yuka. Good to see you. So just want to do a quick opener here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Amy, who will direct the panel. I would say to begin with, we put together a really interesting panel of alumni who are facing some of the same challenges that you as students graduating into a tumultuous world are facing. And I would say the main message from us for you guys here today is you're not alone. Don't panic. There's definitely a great career in your chosen field in hospitality ahead for you. It may take some twists and turns you didn't anticipate, but it certainly doesn't mean that you can't have a great and successful career in our industry. And I think all of our panelists are great examples of that. And look forward to hearing some of their stories, some of their experiences. So before I hand it over to Amy, maybe we just start by having each of them quickly introduce themselves, just name, year of graduation, the degree that they pursued and completed. And what I think might be interesting to hear is when you entered the program, Stephen and Lisanne and Amy, what were you thinking your career was going to be? And then what is it you do today? And then Amy will spend some time exploring a little bit more, what did it take to get there? So maybe, Lisanne, if you don't mind kicking off.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisanne Woolcock, and I graduated in 2003 from the Masters in Tourism program. I was an international student, as you can tell. I'm from Jamaica originally. And currently I'm with Expedia Group. I've been with Expedia Group a total of, I think, 7.5 years now, with a 3-year break somewhere in the middle. When I joined the program, I joined, as I mentioned, in tourism and graduated tourism. But throughout the program, I kept thinking, oh, I should have done hospitality. So, and I think we're going to talk about kind of twists and turns in our careers. And you'll see that I've done a little bit of everything, but that's me in a nutshell, and definitely looking forward to chatting with you more.
Great, maybe Stephen, if you want to.
Sure. Hi, I'm Stephen Redford. I graduated in 2002 with the track that I took was the destination tourism marketing classes. I got an MS. I remember there were 2 tracks. It was destination tourism and there was strategic marketing. I had wished I had done the strategic marketing because it ended up being more about what I'm doing now. But for some reason, I thought that my career that I would end up in a local marketing, like the NYCN company, whatever they're called. I thought I'd be doing that, or that I would move to a beautiful destination and help the market there. But I ended up in hotels. So it did take a twist and a turn. And recently, not recently, but 7 years ago, I started my own company, a small digital marketing company.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Amy in a second, but first I'll do a quick intro of myself. Steen Petri. I graduated from the master's program as well in 2003, I think it was now, and focus on asset management and development. When I entered the program, that's what I really wanted to do. I came from an operational background and wanted to pivot into that type of career. I'm now SVP of investments for a third-party management company called HEI Hotels and Resorts. And it certainly was not a direct line from the one point to the other, but eventually got to do pretty much what I was intending to do when I entered the program. Amy, if you want to tell us about your background as well, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steen. So hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Amy Zoe. I graduated in 2014 with a bachelor's in hotel and tourism management. So when I got into the program, I knew that I always wanted to pursue a career in food and beverage and restaurants specifically. So post-graduation, I was able to stay in New York City. I started off with a company called Be Our Guest, and later transitioned over to a general management position here at Cote in New York City. And I'm the current director of operations, and I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. Please do excuse me if there's a little bit of ambient sound in the background. I actually am in the restaurant this morning. But that being said, I think this morning is a great opportunity to learn from Lesanne, Stephen, as well as Steen, who all graduated from a similar time period with very, very diverse backgrounds. And we're all very excited, myself included, to learn from you guys today in terms of what it takes to be adaptable in times of crisis and times of challenge. So without further ado, I'd kind of like to start off with the first question here. So we all know that the landscape at the time when you guys had graduated was quite challenging post 9/11. Perhaps we could start with Lesanne. We can get into Stephen and Steen. We'd just like to hear a little bit about what your own kind of emotional state was kind of graduating at the time, how you felt, and how it was that you kind of approached finding a job under these new circumstances. So Lesanne, please.
Sure. So I actually applied to NYU on 9/11. My application was at FedEx on 9/11, and a friend of mine who worked at FedEx called me and said, "Do you want me to hold this package for you?" And I said, no, even if NYU is the only thing standing, I'm still going. So I kind of knew from the beginning that it was going to be difficult. I moved to New York the day after New Year's on January 2nd, and then started with NYU later in that month. And when I graduated, there was still a lot of uncertainty. I mean, it was 2003 and business travel hadn't fully come back. Meetings and incentives hadn't fully come back. Groups hadn't come back. So, and I graduated wanting to go into the hotel side of the business. So I knew it was going to be challenging, and it was. And I think one of the ways that I mentally got through that is that I kept telling myself, well, I may not get into the dream role that I wanted or the dream company, but I knew I was going to get into the industry somehow. I saw other people getting roles and moving up, and I kind of changed my mindset around what my career was going to look like, but I knew I still wanted to go into the industry. So that's kind of, the situation that I faced when I graduated in 2003.
Yeah, same thing with me. I actually finished my coursework 1 month before 9/11. So, and I left on vacation thinking I finished, I can go and relax. And while I was away, 9/11 happened. So I came back to a very different city. I just knew that it was going to take longer, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way because I was very rigid in. I knew I had this degree, and it was the degree was specific to a certain job, and I had to get that job. So that was the mistakes that I made. I ended up working in a hotel, but I made a few mistakes along the way. I talked myself out of a couple jobs, which it was very. I'll explain later, but I saw it as a challenge. I'm in New York City, and everything is a challenge here. And I knew eventually I would get a job. It took me a little longer than I thought, but I did, and everyone in my class did. And so it will happen. It will definitely happen.
Yeah, I graduated around the same time as Lesanne and Stephen. Certainly when I went into the program in early 2001, it was to pivot from 6 years in operations into investments or asset management, and prospects looked great for that. But obviously the events of 9/11 completely halted that. Nobody was going to hire anybody in that field when I graduated. So I to begin with, worked with the company I worked with during my schooling, which was Hotel RevMax, which was a data provider similar to Smith Travel Research for those who work on the hotel side. That company was ultimately absorbed by TravelClick. So I was involved with transferring assets from New York to their headquarters in Schaumburg, Illinois. And they offered me a role. And I turned that down because I knew I wanted to be on another side of the industry and I didn't want to get too distracted. That said, I went back into operations for a few months, worked as the FOM at the W Union Square. I then ended up working freelance for an individual who was assembling a development in Cooper Square. And then ultimately got an opportunity to join a company, the Waterford Hotel Group, that some of you may be familiar with, but it required leaving the city, moving to the eastern parts of Connecticut, which for those of you who lived in Manhattan for a period of time is like traveling to a different continent, right? Some people don't travel north of 14th Street while they're at NYU. But it was an opportunity to join a company that I had become a little bit familiar with because the CEO had visited NYU and been a guest speaker, and I researched them and I realized they were a really good company. So even though the role I took there was not in development or investments, but again, sort of semi-operational analytical work, it gave me the chance to put my foot in the door with a company that I really admired. And it was putting me on the right track. So it was one of the lessons that I try to keep my eye on the price, but it did take some twists and turns. And then I was kind of open with them about what the role I really wanted to be in eventually. And they were sensitive to that. So after 6 months there, an opportunity came to switch over into an analyst role.
That's awesome, Steen. So I really appreciate that kind of transition into talking about kind of lessons learned on how to be adaptable. You mentioned having to be open-minded to moving to a new location. Stephen, I'd like to direct the conversation back to you. You talked about some of the mistakes that you made early on with being a little bit too rigid. Can you give a couple of examples and how you kind of learned to become more adaptable?
Yes, well, one of them was an interview that I had. I started just going on interviews for practice, and I responded to an ad from JetBlue. JetBlue was a pretty new airline at the time, and they were looking for a pretty high position in their PR department. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. And I went and I had to write a little essay first, and I wrote a really good essay, and they responded because of the essay. And I got there and I was just blowing it out of the water. I was having the best interview. I could tell it was going really well. And somehow they asked, I forgot how it came about, but they asked me, what is it that you really want to do? And I said almost the opposite. I said I reverted back to what my degree was. Oh, I really want to work for a destination and do marketing. And they were like, well, this is JetBlue, and we want you in the PR department. And I lost the job right there. And I tried to bring it back, and I realized what I did wrong. But yeah, I never heard from them again. So that's the kind of thing, like I in my mind, I was so set on a certain type of job. And I literally talked myself out of probably a great opportunity. Do I want to work for an airline? Maybe not. I mean, maybe in the long run, I think I ended up where I was supposed to be. But that's the kind of thing you want to steer away from. Be open to anything.
You also mentioned that, in some of those opportunities that you took, that you kind of stay connected with the people that you were working with, and you were able to share with your supervisors the path that you would ultimately like to take. Can you provide some advice to the students on how they can engage their supervisors in these sorts of conversations?
I'm sorry, is that directed to me?
Well, to either you or Steen, right? Because, again, like being able to navigate, I think, through these not only different companies, but different positions within the companies. Steen had mentioned specifically that he had stayed connected, with the folks that he was working with, letting them know that eventually he would like to pursue path in XYZ and how he's able to eventually get there with the support of his supervisors.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I was introduced to that firm because their CEO came and spoke in one of our classes, and I liked their approach and I researched them. So I applied for a position there first that I didn't really want, but just because I wanted to go up and interview them and get to know them and figure out, is this really a great company that I think it is? And it wasn't a role I ended up with. But then they called me a few months later and said, well, we have this other role. It was an assistant to the president of operations, and it was really just handling any kind of projects that nobody else would pick up or could pick up. It didn't fall in their area. So it's like, all right, that sounds interesting. It's really not what I want to do though. I really want to be in development. And they said, well, we don't have openings in development, but why don't you come up and join us? And as we're a growing company, we will definitely keep that in mind as we continue. So it was a matter of trust, obviously, because they could have just said, all right, fine, we've got him on the hook, and then I'd be stuck in that job for the next many years. And it was a big move. It was leaving New York and moving up there. And I rolled the dice maybe a little bit. Maybe it's just a matter of the situation you're in at the time that there's distress, but it was really a matter of saying, here's a company I really admire. And I think if I stay with them for a year and it didn't work out, I will have taken something with me that's valuable, and I'll have some more operational and maybe a little development background. And then it was sort of without bugging them every month and saying, are you ready for me over in the development side? It was just staying close and then trying to show that I had some of the analytical skills that they needed. So it was within 6 months, they had an opportunity and I moved over. But it was also not, you know, it was an analyst role. I had a lot to learn there still. And, you know, I could easily have been saying, well, that's not what I went to school for. I'm not going to be an analyst. I have 6 years, 8 years of experience. What are you talking about? But sometimes you have to take a little sidestep or step down and then prove yourself. And I ended up staying with them for 3.5, 4 years before then moving on to the next company.
Thank you, Steen. I'd like to direct the next question at Lesanne. So I know that there are a lot of international students, you know, in this meeting with us today. Lesanne, do you have any advice for international students as far as, you know, navigating the job market as an international student?
Yes, definitely. I just kind of to take a step back for a second and go to what Stephen mentioned about being hyper focused on what you studied or what your degree is versus what the opportunity could be. I faced that same kind of roadblock. You know, I was like, well, I've done this degree, this master's in tourism. I want to work either in tourism or in hospitality at a level that aligns with the degree that I've just walked out the door with. And because I was an international student, I had a huge reality check and I said, well, I need to focus on getting sponsorship. So one of the ways that I did that was, and I think that would help the group as well, is I focused on, number one, my network. So there's some companies that won't publicize that they sponsor across the board, especially today. Back then, I was lucky enough to know someone who worked at a company that did sponsor across the board actively, and they did recruit from colleges, and they pretty much sponsored every international student that came in the door. It wasn't hospitality and it wasn't tourism. My first role was as a management trainee at Enterprise Car Rentals because they sponsored. So initially I thought, well, I don't want to work in cars. I had worked in car rentals back home before I migrated, and it wasn't part of my career goals. I never considered going back to working in cars. It wasn't something I was interested in doing, but they sponsored. So again, I had to really shift my mindset and say, well, the priority right now is to get sponsorship because I would like to stay in the US. And I took that role. Again, it was a management training role, and everyone who came into Enterprise at that time started as a management trainee. So there was a clear path to moving up within the company. And that's really what helped to convince me. But even during that first year that I was with them, I still was hung up on the fact that, oh, I'm not doing what I really want to do. So I would say that was one of the mistakes that I made, not really looking at that opportunity for what it was, an opportunity and not really a setback. And the other part, apart from, really managing your network and ensuring that you have those relationships in place so you can tap into opportunities when they come up, is I think in the spirit of, a lot of companies now really focusing on diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, depending on, the way that they call it. I think a lot of companies are trying to bring different voices to the table and bring a lot of different experiences in. And as an international student, you really have that baked in. You may have worked outside of the US. You may have a specific cultural understanding. You may speak a different language that a company is looking to, perhaps tap into that market. So I think managing your network, building those relationships, but also recognizing what you bring to the table and not underestimating. You may not have years and years of experience, but you can add value. So that's the advice that I would give.
Lesan, thank you. I think that's actually a perfect transition into another topic here, which is the topic of networking, which nowadays can be super challenging with this new landscape of digital networking in particular. Stephen, do you have any advice on how students can best present themselves both in a physical sphere as well as digitally?
Yeah, networking is something I wished I had done a lot more when I came right out of school, and especially early in my career, because I'm almost 100% dependent on it now for my business. I would say join as many organizations as possible, whether it be part of your church, your local, anything, Asian American business, whatever it is, join it. The other thing I would say is when we go back to networking in person, the mistake I used to make it a numbers game. I had to get as many business cards as I could, or give as many. I would say now I'm much more realistic. If I can leave a networking event and made one or two meaningful contacts from that event, it's a success. And when I say meaningful, I mean have a real conversation, find out what, about their family, where they live, what are their hobbies, what are their business interests, what are their pain points in their business, how can you help them? That's another thing. Don't go into every networking event or even have this mindset of what can I get out of it? We have a saying that givers gain. It's almost like karma. Help each other make contacts, form small groups or large groups within your class and help each other. Help the one, look to your left and your right and help those people. I guarantee you it will come back to you. That's my advice.
Steen, Lesan, do either of you have any other advice to give as well? It's such an important topic.
I think Stephen, his lessons were really some of the same lessons that I learned as well. And I think it starts small, right? If you're not comfortable jumping into a big crowd and sort of meeting everybody, then start small. Pick somebody, somebody your own size, right? I mean, don't walk up to Chris Nassetta, CEO of Hilton, and try to ask him about his vacation plans. But if you can strike up a conversation with somebody who's your peer and start having a relationship with them, it sort of grows from there. So that's my main, and to Stephen's point, don't look to walk away with 12 business cards and think that's success, right? Make a connection instead. That's much more valuable.
Yeah, I think both Steen and Stephen summed everything up, but I love the idea of being a connector. I think that, that's one of the values that we can all bring to any networking event or any networking experience, because it doesn't actually need to be a formalized event. It could just be a conversation that you're having with someone. I think one thing that I would add is, I remember when I first started with the Caribbean team at Expedia, and Atlantis, Paradise Island was one of my clients. And I was really nervous because although I'm from the Caribbean, I had worked at the Waldorf in New York for a really long time. With Booking.com, I managed New England. So I didn't have a ton of resort experience. And I thought, okay, how am I going to be an advisor to this mega resort? You know, how can I actually add value? And I mean, I worked with them for about 3 years. And then now they're my client again, now on the media side. And we have weekly calls. And I have a fantastic relationship with them. And I always thought, oh, we just gel on a personal level, which we do. But what my contact recently said to me is she loves talking to me because I always have like the latest news. And I didn't realize that I was adding that value. I thought she was always clued in. I had that impression of her as just always knowing what's going on. But I'm a voracious reader. I feel like I know a lot of what's going on. And I always share that with her in our weekly calls. And I had no idea that was an important piece of our conversation. Really what I was bringing to the table was filling her in on what was going on in the macro world or macro industry versus what's happening at Atlantis. So I think that's one way to look at it as well.
Thank you, Lesanne. Yeah, I think this philosophy and approach towards networking is super, super important. Do any three of you maybe have any also, practical tips and tricks, things that you like to share just to prepare yourself for networking or maybe post networking? One thing that I can share is I learned this trick from, friends in the tech industry. They really have their kind of digital business card built out on their iPhones so that, when meeting people rather than giving cards these days, you can just airdrop people your full contact information, right? Including your photo, as well as all the various organizations that you are involved with. Maybe we'll start with Lesanne. Do you have any tips and tricks of how to kind of cement those connections that you're making?
Sure. One thing that I do a lot of is researching the person. I don't like to call it stalking, but in a sense it is. I mean, kind of knowing a little bit about that person, not necessarily going into the conversation knowing, what they ate yesterday for dinner or where they went on vacation last and kind of, sharing all of that back, but just getting a sense of their personal and professional background. So you can go into that conversation already aiming to connect with them. So that's what has helped me greatly.
Yeah, and to further Lesanne's point, she's researching the potential client or the potential employer. Trust me, they're researching you too. They're looking at everything. So be really diligent about your own personal brand. Make sure your LinkedIn page is spot on, and make sure all your social media is maybe pivoted or used to further your brand and your job aspirations. And make sure there's anything inappropriate on there because someone will see it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, and I think Lesanne and Stephen, they talk about this research up front. If you know who you're going to meet with, is obviously valuable. You sometimes don't know who it is you're meeting, or you meet people at a conference. But going back afterwards and learning a little bit more about them, what their role really is, maybe understand their path, and then reaching back out, sending somebody an email or shooting them a connection through LinkedIn. Nobody ever takes offense to that.
Thank you so much. So I also know that a lot of the students here are probably interested in this topic of entrepreneurship. And, Steve and Lesanne, both of you have started your own businesses. And, I was hoping that the two of you could touch on maybe lessons learned and challenges there and what inspired you to, branch off on your own. Lesanne, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Well, yeah, so I was hotel revenue management consultant for 3 years. I focused on resorts in the Caribbean. And so I left Expedia, started my business, and then I came back to Expedia last year. I always wanted to have my own business. I remember thinking about having a training consulting firm. I just always thought that there were these gaps that perhaps were not filled by an employee, where I could come in and add some external context, you know, or add some value as a consultant. And I decided to take the leap when I left Expedia, and it wasn't necessarily planned. I mean, I left Expedia as a planned transition, but I went into another role that was a remote role. I needed to live somewhere else. And so this role was perfect because I could work from anywhere. It wasn't the best fit. And then I said, you know what? I feel like this is the time. There's something kind of driving me to finally doing what I had a business plan written out and everything for, 7 years prior, and decided to take the leap. And the parts that I thought would have been hard were not. And the parts that I thought would have been easy were really difficult. So one thing I thought would have been really hard was, I thought it's going to be hard to find clients. And it's going to be difficult to get paid on time. And those things were easier than I expected. Having the relationships in place, a lot of these were clients that I worked with from when I was at Expedia, and my former Expedia coworkers referred me to them. So the transition to getting clients was pretty easy. I had 5 steady clients that paid me on time every month for 3 years. It was wonderful. The parts that I thought that turned out to be more difficult than I had expected was managing client relationships. When you're not an employee, but they think you're an employee, or when you've been vague about the scope of work that you're coming in to do, and your role seems to be just growing exponentially, and being able to say no to clients and managing that relationship, being firm about exactly what you're here to do and adding that value, while also not going outside of the bounds of what you've agreed to, and maintaining the relationship at the same time. So that was my experience. It was amazing. I learned so much. I learned a lot about managing myself and working with others at different levels, working with owners, which I never had that experience before, and just kind of analyzing problems and coming up with creative solutions, working with internal teams. And I mean, it was, I don't regret it at all. I think it's helped me incredibly in what I'm doing now, being a consultant to destinations and hotels. So yeah, it was an amazing experience, but definitely some hurdles and some mistakes along the way.
Hi, for me, I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest one on the panel. For me, it was just life changed. I was in sales and marketing in a very competitive environment here in New York City for small luxury hotels, boutique hotels, and most of my clients were in the entertainment industry. So I was doing a lot of entertaining. I was out 3 or 4 nights a week and then having to be in meetings the next morning. And frankly, as my age increased, I just got tired. I didn't want to do it anymore. I had 25 years in the tourism hotel business, and I was tired. I was done. So I decided to start my own business so that I could just report to myself. I know how I work. I can get a lot done in 3 hours, and then I'm done for the day. Where I work really fast and really hard. I don't need someone over top of me telling me that I got to be there for 8 hours. So I had to get away from that. What I will say is this country, the US, makes it very easy to start your own business. It's extremely easy to get an LLC. All you need is a laptop and a website, and you've got your own business. The hard part is what Lesanne spoke about. I didn't have any problems negotiating or dealing with my clients because I have a sales and marketing background. So I was used to dealing with difficult clients here in New York City, used to dealing with people who may try to get over on you. I was already aware of all that. The hardest part for me is getting new clients. And this goes back to the networking and I've always got to be looking for the next client. When I get a new client in the door, I've always got to be thinking about the one after that. And I'll add to this. When you get your first job in this industry, you don't get complacent, just like Steen spoke about. You should already be thinking about your next position, your next job. You want to stay and you want to get that experience, and you want to stay there long enough, but it's an ever changing. You've got to stay up with the times, and it may lead to your own company. Like the more you move around, the more jobs you have, the more you learn.
Thank you so much. So I know that we wanted to give an opportunity for everyone to kind of go into breakout rooms to give everyone the chance to ask their questions that they've prepared. But before we move in, I just have a final question for all of our panelists. What was the biggest challenge to navigating this pandemic in your professional careers? How did you have to pivot your role or your company? Lesanne, we'll start with you.
Well, so I decided to wind my business down pre-COVID. My last day operating my business was January 31st. I started back at Expedia on February 3rd. And then Expedia went through a 3,000 employee layoff about 2 weeks after that. So this was before COVID had really started impacting this side of the world. So it was unrelated to COVID. This was a strategic decision that Expedia made in Q4 of last year, or of 2019. And so right off the bat, I came back to Expedia and we lost 3,000 people. And then COVID happened. So I think I know personally, I've lived in a state of constant anxiety for the past year. And I think a lot of us have. That has been challenging. At the same time, though, in my role where I advise destinations and hotels on how to market to clients, how to strategize their media campaigns, it's helped me to accelerate my learning, because whatever I knew pre-COVID you can apply some of it now, but you really have to be creative. The pool of travelers is different. The needs of the travelers are different, and destinations and hotels have to think really differently about their marketing and their media strategies. So it's been challenging, but at the same time, it's helped me to think outside of the box, right? And to really help these destinations to pivot their entire strategies. A lot of destinations have 5 and 10-year plans. They've had to throw that out the window and figure out, okay, do they even have airlift? So, it's been challenging, but definitely a lot of learnings from that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about our situation. We're a management company with 85 hotels across the US, and obviously a very, very challenging last 12 months, lots of layoff, lots of furloughs, etc. I would say that it's about, the first few months was triage hospitality in some ways, right? In terms of where do you help out in the organization? Where do you create and show that you have value? Because to Lesanne's point, we've all been super anxious about, even keeping our jobs in just a great uncertain time. But we spend a lot of time normally on looking for the next acquisition deal, underwriting that, bringing that to a capital partner. But when everything stopped about a year ago, our team started focusing on break-even analysis and where do we help owners and our operating team figuring out what to keep open, what not to. So it's about flexing and adapting, and our whole operating platform has adapted. So it's a very different operating company today and going forward than it was pre the events of COVID shutdown. And we were always a very entrepreneurial and dynamic program, but it comes back to times change and you just have to adapt and figure out how you can create value for your company and for yourself. and make the most of it. There's lots of opportunities will come out of this as well.
Yeah, I have to say that the biggest challenge for me is still this whole Zoom thing. I don't know if you could see the thing I've got rigged up behind me. That whole thing I'm still struggling with. When I first signed on, I was on that side of the room and it was completely dark, so I had to grab my laptop and run over here. That's still, it's minor, but it's irritating. I need to invest in some real equipment because I think this is going to last a while. I don't know. But anyway, I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a web design and an SEO company. And, we are one of the companies that I did better. We got more clients. A lot of people started companies that I'd been talking to that had 15-year-old websites and didn't think they needed to update, now realized that they had to. So they contacted us, and companies that I had been saying, if you want to be on the first page of Google, you need to do SEO. They started calling me back. So I actually have more clients now than before COVID. So, I'm not Amazon, I'm not making millions off of it, but I'm doing okay. But I will say this, this is a challenge for everyone because it was like that for 9/11. If you can get a job in this market, and you'll be able to get a job anywhere, anytime for the rest of your life, because this is the toughest. You'll have so much confidence after this.
How about you, Amy? What has your experience been?
Well, the experience in the restaurant sphere has been interesting to say the least as well. Restaurants were mandated in New York City to shut down. Give me one moment, guys. This is the part where I moved to a different part of the dining room. Give you a tour of the bar here.
Already.
Who needs a drink at 10 a.m.? Restaurant people. So restaurants were a pretty unique transition, especially here in New York City. For anyone that went through quarantine in New York City, we all know that we had a pretty near complete shutdown for a very long time. And here in restaurants specifically, I think Lesanne nailed it right on the head. Creativity was key. And we had to not be afraid of blowing up what existed, because what we were before was really irrelevant to survival, right? And in March of last year, when restaurants were mandated to shut down, we had a sense of what was coming. So we were one of the lucky ones. We had started preparing for takeout operations prior to the shutdown. So by the time it happened, we were ready to pretty much roll that out. But what's been challenging for the restaurant industry specifically is that there's been a lot of industry specific restrictions without a lot of industry specific relief. And a lot of the government, PPP loans and programs didn't really quite fit the restaurant business model. But that being said, we found a way to make it work. It had to get really down and dirty. There were some truly heartbreaking moments. We had to lay off 85 employees March of last year. And then when we started rebuilding and rehiring and restaurants shut down again in December, we had to lay everyone off again. And it was truly more difficult the second time than it was the first. But there was also a year that when I look back on, I don't really focus on the times that were tough. I think fondly of the memories that we built, because we ended up with a small crew of 10 managers and chefs, and every day we came in and we all became prep cooks. It was all back to basics. What do we have to do to make this work, right? But I don't think that we would have picked to do it any other way. If we had a choice of doing it all over again, I think we all would have chosen to come in and do it. We discussed it with the team, and we certainly could have all decided to close the restaurant down and take the unemployment. But we decided to stay open because the reality is in the restaurant business, there's a lot of folks that don't qualify for unemployment. So we decided to keep the restaurant open in order to support our team members, our family members, truly, that didn't qualify. So learned a lot, that's for sure. Had to learn to be adaptable and creative. Thank you, Steen. So Danielle, I guess I'll pass this back to you, and perhaps you'd like to split us off into some rooms, or?
Yeah, so I just want to thank, our 4 alumni panelists who are just incredible. I mean, I learned so much, and so I'm really excited I was able to listen in on this conversation. And so just, again, just really, really thankful to have you all.